and returning guest, Tom Petch. Tom, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you? How was your Christmas?
Christmas was great. Stayed here. New Year, not so much. From New Year's Day, I had 5 days in my bed with some sort of respiratory virus.
The man flu. Got you.
But it was a knockout. I had to go. I was in bed. Couldn't sleep, but I was in bed for 5 days.
Lovely.
And yeah, my wife's she's never seen me like that. So
that was rubbish.
It was great weather. But look, it was New Year's week. There's a lot of people here, so it was actually all right.
Slopes. Crowded slopes.
Yeah, crowded slopes.
You've had good snow and we've had good surf, so that's good. Good start to the year, anyway.
Yes, you were surfing in, was it Brighton or somewhere down south?
No,
south
we
coast?
surf up near the Witterings, so we have a break out front. It doesn't fire that often. It's quite. Oh God, we're going to go off on a tangent here already, but it's quite complicated. It's a long way up the channel for the pulse to get up here, so we're not like the West Coast. It gets a lot of surf, but we do get the odd good day, which we've had a few of, which is nice.
Well, I listened to our last podcast today, just now, and the feedback I got from the last one was good podcast, but you guys didn't really talk about the origins of the SAS, which is the whole point of you coming on, was to talk about the origins of the SAS.
We just waffled away about it. Wasn't relevant. Okay. All
Pull
right,
up a sandbag, swing that lantern.
We'll stay on message today.
Stay on message. So we've got a tight hour here, so let's go. Yeah. So Tom, a little bit of background. You're a movie producer, director, writer, location finder, manager, and author. And you've gone, as a former Special Forces, UK Special Forces guy yourself, you've done a deep historical dive into the origins of the SAS. And the last time we talked about the TV show, the BBC TV show, SAS Rogue Heroes, and how stylized and messed with it has been. And we touched on that a little bit. I haven't actually watched the second season. I can't get it here at the moment, so I have to wait till it comes out.
I'm going to say, can you guys get it? Because I've had to watch it because I've actually just done an interview about it. But yeah, they'd gone Italy and the Special Raiding Squadron and Blair, Paddy Mayne, and again, it's quite interesting. It's quite an interesting series. That
yeah. I mean, it's touching on historical facts. It's just the story, I guess, is.
Yeah, I kind of don't. I'm probably not like a lot of historians have got quite up in arms about it, but I do think if you're going to get your history from TV, you're looking in the wrong place. Do you know what I mean? Like,
true.
I always cite the fact that David Lean did, the Lawrence of Arabia film, The Charge in Aqaba, never happened, and that's a beautiful scene where they ride down the valley and the guns are firing. Absolute historical nonsense. So if you're going to go find your history on a TV show or a film, you're looking in the wrong place. And I think, and in a way, that has been like an entry level for people's interest into the subject. And I think if people are taking interest in history, then great, as a result of the TV series.
No, that's cool. And I've checked out, you've done a lot of podcasts recently with, We Have Ways.
James
podcast.
Holland, Al Murray in there, and they wanted me to do, so another sort of not so well-known bit of history maybe, which I covered in my book, which is the France 1944 campaign. In my book, I just did actually cover basically A Squadron and 1 SAS because I was following the character of William Fraser. But I obviously know a lot about it, and there's a much wider story there, which is about the French SAS, Belgium SAS, which people don't even know we had a Belgium SAS, but we did, company of Belgians who fought with the SS in France. And it was a big Special Forces operation of 2,000 men. Again, that's not very well covered by the history books. So we did a 3-part end of last year on that, which I think went down quite well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're good at it. It's good, especially as a former member of the Special Forces. Yeah, I guess there's a bit of an impetus to find out more about it, how it all came about, and to actually set the story straight, because it seems to be a lot of, well, I wouldn't say nonsense.
My kind of interest started because I was working on film and I got involved. Actually, it was a retrospective. It was a biopic of Blair, Paddy Mayne, which luckily didn't get made because it was quite inaccurate. They got me in to consult on that script, and then there was another thing I did. And then I started looking into the story with a view of maybe doing something myself. And my wife said, this is going to be a book. I think I said that last time. It was a book because it was so much material that was kind of uncovered. Or I went back to, for every incident, I went back to the archive. Well, I went back to the original sources, which are basically books usually written in the 40s or 50s. And then after that, I went back to the original archive. And it was interesting to read. As you know, if you read an original war diary, which you probably saw in your military service, or an operational report, or, orders issued, you with your military background like me would look at them and go, okay, well, this isn't saying what perhaps some historians have taken from it. Because you and I would look at it and go, well, with my military experience, I know what they're trying to say here. There's a bit of nuance in all military communications, even signals. Nobody ever says, we've really messed up here. There's a sort of way of dressing that up, or no one ever says, this officer's absolutely useless.
Low average.
Below average is as far as bad as it gets, yeah. If you got below average on a competent report in the army, you'd be in a lot of trouble. That means you're...
Yeah. I'm not sure. I might have got one of those. Who knows?
Here we go.
I should have gone to the SAS. I would have fit in right there.
You should have done, yeah. If you can't follow the rules. Actually, no, the SS have rules, and I shouldn't be talking about that, but the SS have rules, of which I have fallen foul. But anyway, there you go. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about something else.
Yes. So the floor is yours, Tom. The floor is yours.
Oh,
Let's
the floor is mine. Oh, you're not going to ask me a question?
I don't even really know where to start. Where do you want to start?
Well, I suppose. Okay, let's start with where I started, which was this character of Dudley Clark, who is the character portrayed by Dominic West in the Rogue Heroes series, and he was kind of my discovery that he had a lot more to do with the founding of the SAS than perhaps people realise. And there was this one reference in a book by Virginia Cowles, which is called The Phantom Major, which is it's a kind of first book written really about the SS and the war that covered the origin story. And that origin story was, it's called The Phantom Major because it's about David Sterling, and apparently that was the name he was nicknamed, The Phantom Major. And it was about how they created this unit in the Western Desert in 1941. And there were bits of that story that didn't quite stack up to me, like, the idea of inventing a new unit in the British Army, as you know, would be really complicated from the ground up. You'd have to have generals signing it off. You'd have to have, quartermasters giving it equipment. This isn't going to happen as a rogue unit. There must have been people behind this. And there was this one reference in that book where the general commanding in Egypt, who's a man called Cloud Alchemek, turns to David Sterling and goes, whatever happens to your project, it'll greatly relieve Clark's burden. This is one-line reference to Clark. And I thought, hell, if Virginia Cowles is a war correspondent knew about this guy, and if the general commanding is referring to him in this interview with David Sterling, this guy must have been up to something. So I started digging, and the digging led all the way back to basically 1939, 1940, and who the hell is Dudley Clark?
Yeah, so when I listened to our last podcast, you mentioned Dudley Clark, and they were calling them commando units after during the Boer War, the Boers in South Africa that's what they call themselves, the commando units. They were basically skirmishing on horseback, usually, or rather, riding around the desert and all over South Africa on horseback, dismounting and taking them on. Irregular, which is a early form of guerrilla warfare. But you mentioned that he'd had some experience down there. What was it?
Yeah, his family. The reason he chose the name Commandos was because of the brand, because he needed to communicate to the wider British Army and High Command what he was talking about. And Commandos is a good name because the moment you mention Commandos, everyone thinks of the Boers, like you're saying, with their ponies, guerrillas, riding around the veldt. And everyone in the British Army would have been aware in 1940 about just how much trouble that caused them. They were very hard to track, very hard to catch. They popped up, started sniping at British troops, bloody difficult. And that was his concept in 1940. So straight after Dunkirk, we come back across the channel, and we were hopelessly outnumbered by the Germans. We had no equipment, and we were preparing at the time, if you remember, for a German invasion. That seemed quite likely. This is straight after Dunkirk. But at the same time that was going on, Churchill was making speeches about, wars not being won by evacuation. He wanted the offensive spirit. And Clark at that time, Dudley Clark, was working for a guy called Jack Dill, who he'd known, strangely, because he'd worked for him in Palestine, fighting the Arab insurgency over there. And he said to Jack Dill, this is the night after the Dunkirk evacuation. Dill's kind of looking out the window and Whitehall going, what the hell are we going to do? And Clark's his PA. And Clark goes, you know what, boss, what we should do is create commandos. We should do what the Arabs used to do to us, what the Boers did to us. We should invent that. We should create our own guerrilla force and send it back across the channel, mess with the Germans. And Dill went, that is a really good idea. Go and write that up. And he wrote it up that night. And then the next day, Dill took it to the chief of staff. And of course, Churchill loved that idea because it gave him, something it gave him something offensive, because at that point there was no way we could get back on the offensive. But actually, yes, we could, with small teams raiding across the channel of commandos. We could get back at the Germans and dissipate their strength.
So let's go back there, because it's another hot topic. What's going on in Palestine right now? But what year was this?
So Clark was there in 1936, which was the start,
Okay.
essentially the start of the Intifada. He was there when it kicked off. It was a very peaceful country actually at the time, but what became the Intifada, so the Palestine-Israeli conflict, that was then Palestine-Jewish conflict. So there were Jewish settlers moving into Palestine. The Arabs didn't like it. That's not quite true, they didn't like it, but there was tension there. And in 1936, it blew up like a powder keg, because some Arabs robbed some Jews on the Jaffa Road and killed, I think, 2 or 3 of them. And then the Jews took a reprisal, went into an Arab house at night and shot the family. And then Jaffa kicked off. It just exploded, and the Arabs rose up and said, that was the start of the Arab insurgency. So there was an insurgency from the Arabs, who are Palestinian Arabs, against the British, occupying power, for want of a better word. And Clark was there, and they had very few troops. So Jack Dill was the boss that he had in the Second World War, was deployed with basically what we'd call a troop surge, a bit like Afghanistan. We sent in divisions of troops to just put a lid on this. Jack Dill arrived, and Clark worked for him directly, and Clark was there instrumental in trying to get hold of this insurgency, trying to suppress the Arab uprising.
Your knowledge is very impressive, Tom.
Well, I read a lot. It's in my books. I've got a lot of books here.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's just the ones I've got here.
Yeah, that's... Yeah. So he got that idea there.
Yeah.
And then took it back. But how did he... I mean, I guess it seems like one of these historical characters that's in the right place at the right time. And he had contacts, or he had the ears of various high-placed generals and people who had the ear of Churchill, that you could actually pitch something, and you don't have to go through the bureaucracy of as is the bureaucracy of any institution, but especially the military. And people often, Tom, as you probably remember, good ideas get stifled because people won't get the credit for it.
Yeah.
And so we get to that stage. But why was he particularly well placed in the first place?
Because of who he was. So he'd been a young officer, not fought in the First World War. And between the wars, he just had an extraordinary career. He was always volunteering for weird jobs, like he worked as a war correspondent in the Rif War. So he volunteered as a war correspondent. You could do a sort of comment in the army in those days. And he went off and worked for the Morning Post to cover the Rif War, which was a Moroccan insurgency led by a Moroccan insurgency leader called Abdul Karim, who led the Berbers. And they fought the Spanish and French. Again, he saw firsthand a really effective insurgency against empire powers and defeating them. He did all this, but he also worked for all the key players. So he worked for Jack Dill, that job in Palestine. Jack Dill was replaced by Archibald Wavell, who then took command of the Middle East, which is relevant for the creation of the SAS story. So, he was known to all these generals as someone, as kind of like sort of a fix-it man, someone who you go to for the alternative solution. And, the trouble with the army nowadays is there's only like 100,000 there. There's probably no room for people like this. But back then, you think about the size of our military. These guys were kind of kept around, In peacetime, probably not the most useful person. But in war, Jack Dill, when he took over command so he became chief in charge of the general staff. So he took over in head of military, head of the army. And he said, I want Clark to be he actually asked, he said, get Clark in here. I need Clark as my PA. Because he knew he was an ideas man. He knew he was a maverick thinker. He was quite odd. He was incredibly short. He didn't fit into the regular military. He was nominally an artillery officer, though he'd fallen out with the artillery by then and didn't really spend any time at regimental duty,
So in the TV show, sorry, I've still got a bit of a chest on me from my near-death experience on the year. And on the TV show, in Rogue Heroes, he comes across as very flamboyant, dressed extravagantly, shall we say?
Yeah.
But he was he not? I can't remember what rank he was carrying, but he seemed to have gotten carte blanche, free hand to go and find these people. But where do you actually go and find the David Sterlings and the Paddy Maynes and those guys?
So if we go through the history of what happened, so he created the Commandos in Britain, and then he actually created SAS in Britain. So there was an SAS before David Stone's SAS, because Clark successfully got the Commandos up and running. They're going across the Channel. Churchill then goes, "Oh, I want thousands of these guys. That's brilliant." Clark's now getting slightly moved sideways, but he really wants to get a parachute unit because he'd been deployed in Norway in 1940, so he's seen the German parachutists working there, and he realised how difficult it was to combat parachutists. And he thought, well, if we had a parachuting commando, that would really help. We'll parachute across the Channel, come back by boat. That's what we'll do. That will really mess with the Germans. So 2 Commando was switched to being a parachute unit. But then there was this typical sort of military argument between the RAF and the Army. And the Army were getting fed up with all these Special Forces troops, which were called Commandos, not getting used. And the Army thought, realistically, these 500 guys of 2 Commando have now been switched to the RAF to do training up in RAF Wingway. They're not going to get used. We don't want them to be left in the Commando. And there was a sort of tug of war, at which point the RAF went, okay, we'll take them under command. And so they left the Commando units, and anything that wasn't, a regular unit and didn't have a name like Commando or the Light Infantry or the Queen's Royal Hussars or whatever it was, they got put into the sort of general pool. And the general pool was called Special Service. Important. And the staff officer just typed, well, they're no longer Special Service, they're probably Special Air Service. So he wrote Special brackets Air Service. And 2 Commando became 11 Special Air Service. And that was the start of the SAS in November 1940. But the whole thing outgrew Clark. It became this big, basically Churchill wanted massive airborne troops. Then that unit, 11 SS, did carry out one operational jump, very important one, called Op Colossus in southern Italy. But by that time, Clark had kind of outgrown that organisation. And luckily, Wavell, that other boss from Palestine, had asked him to come out to Cairo. And he went out to Cairo. And Cairo was the Wild West, essentially. You had Wavell, who was an ideas man, he was not an authority guy. He just let his subordinates get on with it. He created what is known as the Long Range Desert Group by sponsoring Ralph Bagnall, who was a desert explorer, to go out into the desert with, Chevrolet trucks. So he was a guy who didn't, rule with an iron rod. He didn't care about the hierarchy. So, when Clark pitches up there, he employs Clark directly. He says, I want you to head up deception. And then Clark goes, well, you know what would really deceive and worry the Germans and Italians is that lot that just parachuted in Italy, 11 SAS. What about I pretend they're here? Because logically they could have come from here. And he creates a fake SS brigade in Cairo. And that is the start of the story that will lead to Rogue Heroes and David Sterling. So this is the backstory before you ever get to David Sterling. David Sterling isn't there at this point.
Was he 11 SAS?
No, he wasn't. He was a commando. So he's in a commando unit, 8 Commando, and they're still in Scotland training at this point.
Yeah. Wow. What a time. Cairo during the war. That looked like a fun place to be.
Yeah. I mean, it was a fun place to be, but also it was a place where there were very few rules and things were a bit desperate. At that point, the Italians had attacked us because they thought we were going to lose the war. And Mussolini wanted to do a land grab and grab Egypt, which was a British protectorate. Of course, he didn't count on 2 things. Us holding out in Britain was one. As his chief of staff said, Mussolini wanted to be at the victor's banquet with Hitler. Didn't want to get left out. But it all backfired on him because then he ran into a very good British general, probably our equivalent to Erwin Rommel, who's a guy called Dick O'Connor. And Dick O'Connor ran circles around him in the desert. And the Italians fast started to retreat. So that all backfired on Mussolini. But one of the things that Wavell needed to do is he needed to pretend we had a lot more troops. And this SAS brigade was perfect for that because the SS brigade was a completely fictional outfit, training over in Jordan. And the Germans and Italians believed it because we'd actually parachuted in southern Italy. They believed the SS. And they'd captured the real SAS. They'd captured SAS. A troop of the SS were in captivity. So they'd gone, the British have this capability, long-range aircraft, parachuting behind enemy lines, and they've obviously got this brigade which they're ready to strike with in Egypt.
So how was it then that the Germans and the Italians, but they had, we're talking a big space. It's a big area, of North Africa, from Egypt all the way across. And they had, hundreds of, or if not thousands of planes and armored, and you had Rommel there. who was the main man, the star of the show for the Germans at the time. But how did they get all that material there?
Who? The Germans?
The Germans, yeah. Did they drive it down?
No, across the sea, yeah, because when so we were very successful. The attack by Dick O'Connor was very successful, and then the Germans deployed what became the Afrika Korps by boat. Ships from Italy. They dominated the Mediterranean because once the Luftwaffe got into the Med, they had air superiority, so they could protect, even though they didn't have sea superiority. Our ships just got blown out of the water. We couldn't go. If you remember, there's the Crete evacuation when we were coming back from Greece. We lost so many vessels to Stukas, and they had very effective anti-ship. They knew they were going to have to fight the Royal Navy in the Second World War, so they had very effective torpedoes and dive bombers, which just destroyed our navy, and we couldn't stop them shipping the Afrika Korps to Africa, just as we couldn't stop the Italians from resupplying.
Yeah, I guess. Well, it's not that far from south of Italy to North Africa. It's not far at all, actually.
No,
but I didn't realize that they had the air superiority in the Med. But it's just a little sidebar here. But because we talked about Cyprus before, Cyprus being in the eastern Mediterranean, just kind of off the coast of Israel, Lebanon, Syria, south of Turkey, and north of Egypt. So it's a very strategic point. But what happened to Cyprus during World War II?
Crete happened to Cyprus. So because the Germans parachuted on Crete, they captured Crete successfully, but their casualties were huge. And Hitler was very risk averse. This is a weird thing about Hitler. He was always pulling the plug on his generals from operations that were risky, but probably worth doing. Cyprus would have been worth parachuting on. They could have taken it. He didn't, because he was terrified that they had lost so many troops in Crete. He didn't want to do it again.
I didn't realize. So what? Cyprus just remained neutral, or was it?
No, Cyprus was British. It was a British colony. We had troops there, and in fact, 11 Commando with Paddy Mayne and William Fraser went to defend Cyprus. That's where they went before Lityani River. So the first battle that Paddy Mayne and William Fraser fought in, which was against the French. This is so complicated, this history. The Vichy French over in Lebanon. We were trying to get rid of them, and they were sent over there to capture a bridge over the Lityani River to allow and that was the first time that they went into combat. So what would become the SAS, that was one of their first combat operations as commandos.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any idea how many at the time, just when they were about to launch these commandos, the SAS raiding groups, roughly how many aircraft they had in North Africa?
Who, the British or
the Germans? The
Germans. I don't know exactly, but hundreds. I mean, the Italians had a lot of aircraft, but they were not quite as good as some of ours. I mean, our Hawker Hurricanes probably marginally outperformed theirs, I would have thought. But then the Germans came with the real problem we had was the Germans came with the Messerschmitt 109, which was their main fighter, and that was much better than anything we had. And that caused us real problems because it meant the Germans could do. See, the thing about the Germans, and this is like throughout the war, the Germans were often able to achieve what we call tactical air superiority. So if you're non-military audience, that simply means I'm not going to bother to try and get air superiority, which means bomb your airfields and get your aircraft on the ground. I'm just going to get local air superiority directly over the battlefield for a short period of time. And the Germans were very, very good at that. A long way into the war, even when we had more aircraft than them, they could just clear the area they wanted to get their Stukas in and carry out ground attack. And they were very, very good at attacking people on the ground with their aircraft. And we were very, very bad. It wasn't probably till 1943 we actually finally got a handle on how to call in aircraft onto targets on the ground. The Germans could do that. So you imagine the Germans, this is why the Germans were able to do so much with so few people. They were very effective at using their forces in a way we weren't.
Mm. Yeah, a lot of questions there. When you look back, I was going to ask you about this, but you look back about how effective the Germans were. There's one thing that comes up, and I actually did a podcast early on when we used to do a lot of conspiracy episodes, but it was about, I've just blanked on his name, but it'll come to me. But how the Germans were using Pervitin, which was their meth.
Amphetamines, yeah.
Amphetamines for sure. And they would put them, I think the Western powers couldn't really figure out how the troops could catch up with the armored. So the armored, obviously, in vehicles, but you got your foot infantry like I was, and they're following on, but they were doing like 60 to 100 k's a day on foot, and they were coming through after the 3 or 4 days worth of with no sleep and jacked up on Pervitin. And you got at the time you had the French were still getting a bottle of wine ration with a daily ration with their supplies. And so you could imagine you got the two opposites, the languid French in a nice after lunch wine buzz against some.
So we're going to blame the fall of France on Bordeaux consumption versus methamphetamine. But you're absolutely right. The Germans had hit on the fact, actually, quite a long time before, that methamphetamine improved performance. In fact, it was sold to German housewives in chocolate to improve their housework prior to the war. The pills were then actually used illegally by the Wehrmacht in Poland. They got their families to send them these pills. They then developed a drug problem because obviously they worked in blitzkrieg. You're right, got no sleep, high temp operations, and they discovered the pills worked. And then there was an unofficial, because obviously this is Nazi Germany. So one of the reasons the Nazis had come to power was to get rid of the Weimar, who were a bunch of druggies, right? So now we've got a situation where the Nazis are using large amounts of methamphetamine. They had to simulate it actually because amphetamine was owned by, then the company was called SmithKline French. They manufactured it under patent in America, so that was called Benzedrine. And the Germans therefore had to do methamphetamine, so they faked it. They added a carbon molecule to do it, to synthesize it. But anyway, the Germans started using large amounts of the stuff. In France, they actually did drug trials, so they had drug representatives going to the front line to monitor the performance of their troops on the drugs. But the Nazis would deny it all the time. You have this sort of correspondence. There's a very good book. I have to think about what it is. There's Norman Euler, he wrote a book about it. It is all about Hitler taking his drugs, another person who wasn't supposed to take drugs. But they were powered on drugs. And then we discovered, because we captured down airmen, these pills in their pocket. And they were called Stuka tablets. And the initial thought was, these are to stop, because the Stuka comes down in a steep dive. So they initially thought the tablets were something to do with stopping the G-force from the pilot blacking out at the bottom of his dive. Because the Stuka comes vertically, it has to pull a very tight G-turn. But they sent them to a chemist to analyze them and went, no, this is an amphetamine called methamphetamine. At which point Churchill then trialed them on the Commandos. He gave the Commandos, he said, I want some trials. They had 2 commando units in Scotland, gave one, the placebo chocolate and the other one the fast chocolate, and the fast chocolate lot won. It absolutely worked. It's one of those endurance marches in full kit. And the people on speed did better.
Shock horror. Could you imagine? That was going to be my next point. Our next question was going to be where I can't imagine that once the higher ups realized that meth is good in war, that they wouldn't have started doing it themselves. Is there any evidence of that?
We shipped masses of it, millions and millions of tablets to the Middle East. We were deploying 100,000 tablets on the first day of Al Alamein. Everyone was taking amphetamines in large chalices, Benzedrine. You got accounts of them landing on, doing landings and taking, with their rum ration, taking speed. I mean, that's going to be the trouble is you could probably anticipate, having been in the military, is it gives you quite a big blast for a short period of time, but then the long term, at the point we got very addicted to amphetamines, the Germans were working out, it wasn't working out so well. So they had an incident I think it was in Operation Barbarossa, which is the invasion of Russia. They had a big blue on blue where a German unit expended all its ammunition, a battalion, expended all its ammunition in one night because it was taking speed. And I think that those sort of incidents led the Germans to kind of, in 1942, realise this probably wasn't the best idea. But at that point, we were ramping up the amount troops were taking. You weren't allowed to take them in the UK. You could take them if you're an airman, so you could take them if you're a bomber pilot, and you could take them outside the UK. So obviously in the Middle East, everyone was popping pills in large amounts.
So it's a double-edged sword, what you're saying, Tom.
It is a double-edged sword. And I think, to be fair to people, it was an individual preference whether you took them or not. Blair Paddy Mayne famously conducted drug trials on what became so this is after the SAS, it's called Special Raiding Squadron. He conducted his own sort of placebo drug trial on his troops in Port Said before they invaded Sicily. And it worked. The troop he gave the drugs to were faster. So I'm going to assume that the SRS going ashore in Sicily got them Most British troops were taking them, and Allied troops were taking them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those stories you just don't hear about. You can say the Germans
I think it's got covered now. I don't know.
Do you think? I haven't heard it. I didn't know about this.
Yeah. I mean, there's research out. I think it's probably nobody's sat down and done a book about the extent of it because, of course, after the war, Benzedrine addiction was what created the Beat Generation. Jack Kerouac and all that. That's what the drug was. That's what they were taking. Yeah, Bennies. Bennies were the Benzedrine.
Is that right?
I think a lot of that. What?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Bennies is Benzedrine. So they used to get it out of the inhalers. They could get the litmus paper, which was soaked in Benzedrine. Wow, we're going off on a tangent here. This
is a good one, though.
Yeah. So after the war, it became a prescription drug because everyone worked out it was actually bad for you. There were after effects. During the war, they were doing trials, and the trials kind of like, after El Alamein, there's references to it being bad and units performing badly. There was a blue-on-blue at El Alamein where a tank unit took out a open fire on infantry and they suspect that was because of the drug. So we were waking up and smelling the coffee, and at the end of the war, it's basically become a prescription drug. But the Beat Generation worked because we were still sold in an inhaler for your cold and stuff in litmus paper. So the Beat Generation used to break open the inhalers and eat the litmus paper, and that's how Jack Kerouac and that lot did that. And I think the habits might have been brought back by the
GIs,
returning servicemen, who knew about the drug. Yeah,
interesting. So basically, the British Army went back to cigarettes and alcohol in
after
huge
World
doses.
War II. Yeah, we were on cigarettes and alcohol.
Yeah, they were the acceptable drugs. Yeah. All right, let's go back to Egypt. So
Egypt. Yeah.
That was a nice one, but that was a good one. Come on,
it's an interesting one. Yeah,
that's a good story.
Yeah.
So once they got, when you say they were used as a ruse.
Yeah,
I do like that word, ruse.
Ruse, yeah.
And but then they actually started going in and
what happened was Dudley Clark has got a fake parachute unit. He's throwing bundles out over Cairo from aircraft, pretending they're the SAS. They're actually called the SAS. They have a fake unit called K Detachment SAS, which are a bunch of engineers who create gliders. Because the pretend SAS was 3 battalions, 2 glider battalions, 1 parachute battalion, and they moved the glider around in trucks. They set them out on airfields. The Germans actually used to bomb the SAS gliders and attack them because they thought they were real. And in the middle of all this, David Stirling turns up, basically. David Stirling and Jock Lewis are the two sort of key instigators of this story. Jock Lewis, they're commandos. As I said, there's air superiority, so the commandos have to go by sea, but they can't go by sea because if they go by sea, the Stukas come and take out the ships. So they're all kind of rotting in Cairo, getting fed up with the situation. And Jock Lewis goes, we should carry out a parachute operation. And he gets permission from his commander, who's called Bob Laycock, to do a parachute trial. At which moment, David Stirling, who's, gets wind of this and gate crashes the trial, basically, turns up. Jock Lewis is a bit pissed off, he turns up. But I think David Stirling, by this point, it sounds like he's made contact with Dudley Clark. They've been introduced in Shepherds of Cairo, which is my great-grandfather's hotel, which is where the SS then formed. So, yeah, there's a kind of network kind of based around people like Hermione Ranfurly, who's a very famous socialite who was working for the SOE. And they're all hanging out in Cairo. And essentially, Stirling's kind of redundant. He gets Clark's blessing. He goes and does the jump with Jock Lewis. This is the jump where David Stirling breaks his back. Jock Lewis then goes back to Tobruk to carry out commando operations. And David Stirling's now with his back's not broken, but he's hurt himself. And he's kind of laid up in Cairo. And Dudley Clark sponsors, because what Dudley Clark wants Stirling to do is a parachute. He wants him to create a parachute unit. He does not care if it's an effective parachute unit, because what Dudley Clark wants is real parachutists jumping out over Cairo. So in the first meeting of the SAS, which is chaired by the head of training in Middle East headquarters, Clark and Stirling go in there to pitch the SAS to Middle East headquarters. And they're not too keen on it because they're going, on RF go, well, we didn't know about this. We haven't got any aircraft, whatever. But by then, they've already pitched the idea to the high-up. So General Claude Auchinleck, in that meeting I described at the beginning, he's already said, you will create a special air service. And there's another guy in the organisation called General Ritchie, who's very important. And he's got friendly with Stirling, and he's looking after Stirling's interests. He's a kind of another Scotsman. They didn't shoot on each other's estate, as it turns out. Ritchie never met him before, but he meets him, and it's kind of like that. You're a Scotsman, so you know that kind of...
Scots Mafia.
Yeah, I was going to say Scots Mafia, exactly.
Yeah.
but they're kind of operating a Scots mafia. And so essentially, the Middle East headquarters, who do not like the idea of a real SAS, have no choice because the high-ups have told them to get on with it. And this training unit is created in Jennifer Camp. That's what's sponsored. But Sterling knows damn well that he's not going to be able to train anybody because that's not his wheelhouse. Sterling is as it turns out, Sterling's an incredibly determined, very smart operator and a great salesman. However, Sterling is not going to set up a training and selection program and parachute program. That's not his strong point. And he knows he needs Jock Lewis. And so he recruits Jock Lewis in Shepheard's Hotel, Cairo. Jock Lewis has been evacuated from Tobruk. He's ill. He's got desert sores. He's been on operations for far too long. And Sterling and him sit down in my great-great-grandfather's hotel and have a conversation, at the end of which Jock Lewis goes to bed, says he let Sterling know in the morning. In the morning he comes down and says, Sterling, you're on. Provided I can have complete carte blanche for the training of the unit, I will join you in your enterprise. And he says, I don't know why. And then he took Jock Lewis behind the foyer in Shepheard's. There's the god Ra, which is the wings of the god Ra, which he took as the SS badge and put the parachute in the middle. And he thought that will be the badge I will give the boys when they pass their parachute course. So when they've passed my course, they've done what was, proto-selection, which was these desert courses called Lewis marches. And they've done all the training and they've done the jumps, and I'm going to give them the badge. And that's how the unit will become special. So we'll have a special badge to give them at the end of the training. And that was how the SS was created.
And you said your great-great-grandfather owned that hotel.
Yeah, well, he didn't own it then. So my great-great-great three greats was a guy called Samuel Shepheard. He founded Shepheard's in Cairo. He was actually another maverick. He got kicked off the ship because he mutinied against the captain with the crew when he was 20 in Cairo. And he then couldn't get another ship, couldn't get a job.
What year was this?
This was about 1840 or something. So he'd sold the hotel by then. So he got kicked off the ship just before Crimea War, actually, was quite important because Crimea was when the hotel really took off because all the officers used to stay there. In fact, I think one of the Tsar units, 11th Tsar, didn't pay their hotel bill. The whole mess stayed in the hotel. Buggered off to Crimea. So guess what he did? He followed them to the trenches.
To get paid back?
Yeah, he did. The whole lot. He went to Sevastopol the way it was and said, you pay up, you buggers. You drunk all my champagne. I think the sheer shock for all these aristocrats of having the hotel turn up in the Crimea and make them pay was what did it.
That's for real. He just jumped on a ship and followed them there.
Yep. Jumped on a ship. I've got correspondence between his bank and his bank manager going, I've got paid back in full. Anyway, so long story short, he created the hotel. It was very, very popular with the British military. You can imagine it was a party town. There was this great hotel owned by this Englishman. He was actually more of a kind of, he was very in with the Pasha. That's how he got the hotel started. He got sponsored. Wow, we're going on a tangent. Anyway,
that's a good one,
history. He got sponsored by the Pasha, who's the kind of head guy in Cairo, who he got friendly with, who lent him the money. And also where the site of Shepheard's, the original Shepheard's was a princess palace of the Pashas. And he gave it at a very low rent. Samuel Shepheard said, you can start it up. I'll come in with you on the money. We'll split it. And it just took off. And then, of course, people like Mark Twain stayed there. Then, of course, Suez was built, Suez Canal. So everybody went through it. If you were on a liner, you went and stayed in Shepheard's. Flying boat route opened up. Everybody stayed there. But he sold it to the Germans, Bavarians. The Germans bought it. And the Germans redesigned it. So it's actually, this is going to sound bizarre, but it's actually Bavarian architect. When the Germans redesigned it, they wanted something a bit more kind of Disneyland-esque. So They created all these palm tree colonnades. They put the god Ra in there. So the design of the wings, I've got it somewhere. The Bavarian architect's original drawings for those wings for the hotel. So the SS wings were designed by a German. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Right.
There you go. Now, interesting one. I mean, again, this is another diversion, but this is very interesting. I like these little diversions we're doing.
This is what we did last time. We're going to get this podcast.
Exactly.
And you're like, you've not even done any of the SAS.
Yeah. But we've done, we've still got time. But
yeah,
the Germans during World War II, or certainly amongst Hitler and his inner circle, were heavily into the esoteric. And, Egypt is one of these places, like Napoleon, again, well, not very heavily into the esoteric.
Yeah.
Was big on it. He conquered Egypt. Hitler wanted to get hold of it as well. And they had these teams out scouring the world for all these different, they were trying to find the Ark of the Covenant, like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. All these, parts of the cross, just into Nepal, South America, trying to find as much ancient like ancient relics as they possibly could. Do you have any idea why that was? Do you know anything about that? Because then you've got the Ra, you've got the sun god Ra, which is, okay, fair enough. It's probably all over the place in Cairo. I haven't been. But it's just because you've got so much other knowledge. I'm just wondering if you know anything about that.
I don't, but I know. So the Hungarian Almasi, which is the story of the English patient. So he's the guy. You know, if you've ever seen the film The English Patient, there's a guy who's a spy in there who's really burned. And he
is that the one who gets his thumbs cut off?
Yeah, he's the English patient.
Yeah.
And that's based on a true character, which was a guy called Almasi. And he was linked because him and Bagnold and all the desert explorers were together in one big gang. So the lot that went on to create the long-range desert group, and Almasi, who's the Hungarian who ended up working for Rommel because he was a spy, that lot were all looking for Zanustra, which is the lost oasis of the birds in the desert. Why they were looking for it, I don't know. But that's what they were doing out there. They were driving around and flying around in their gypsy mosque, looking for the lost oasis of birds. And Almasi and a guy called Clayton, who was a very famous LRDG commander who got captured, they actually thought they saw it from a gypsy mosque. They looked down, they saw a valley with green vegetation in it, but they could never find it by land. But that led to what became basically the SAS, because the LRDG and those explorers were the guys who pioneered the desert exploration. But they were looking for things that were ancient, because the prehistory of the desert is really interesting. I mean, this is another Civ story, but it was all there was human habitation out there. It wasn't like it is now. And there's one point where Bagnold, they came across some people in the middle of nowhere that they thought were from a lost tribe. And then there's Kufra Oasis, which unfortunately now they drained Kufra Oasis because it relied on fossilized water, so the water ran out. But back then it was an oasis running on fossilized water. And the people were sort of prehistory. They were very ancient cultures out there. You could pick up axes and stone things in the desert, the lost armies and whatever. Yeah, they were wandering around the desert doing all that. But I don't know why the Germans were interested in the Ark of Covenant. I thought that was just a bit of Spielberg-esque writing, actually.
Well, that's another. I mean, that's one thing you could really. I spent quite I went down a very deep. A labyrinth, we'll call that an underground labyrinth. I went down with that one, and
as long as you're not using AI to look it up, you'll be fine.
Yeah, no, I went actually into So anyway, please go. Let's go back. So when they weren't hunting for artifacts, the LRDG guys, they come across very well in that show, because what a job that must have been, just hooning around the desert and souped up Chevrolets, with a big 50 cal.
They were the joint. So when Sterling created the SAS, and they then actually. Their first operation, which was a depiction of that series, is a disaster, because they go after those fighters, the Messerschmitt 109s. We've been ordered to attack the Germans, and the thing we needed to do was knock out their fighters. The RF couldn't do it, and when it wasn't called 8th Army, I think it was. Yes, it was. It was just named 8th Army, just been named 8th Army. When they found out we had parachutists, their brigade major went, "We've got parachutists. We can parachute on these airfields and take out all these aircraft." So they were really keen on the SAS, but of course the SS didn't do that job because of the storm, everything going wrong. And that's when they hook up with the long-range desert group. And really that was the game changer, because the long-range desert group, what the LRDG, those guys in the Chevyrs and the Fords, they were very precise guys. They were more like Bagnall always recruited from the Royal Tanks officers, actually, because that's what he wanted. Sorry, people who don't know the military, Royal Tanks are, how am I going to say this without being rude? How would you describe Royal Tanks?
The original tank regiment.
Original tank people.
Yes.
RTR. Anyway, very good at mechanics and things like that. And as it turns out, extremely good in navigation. So he didn't want the David Sterlings, and in fact, he turned down the Commandos. He didn't want them at all. He wanted guys who knew mechanics, knew how to operate vehicles, were very good in the desert. And they were the joined up bit of the operation, because without them, the SAS would have gone nowhere. They had to have that platform that enabled them to travel into the deep desert, navigate, communicate by high-frequency radio, and all of that was down to the LRDG. Obviously, the SS adopted it once they understood what they were doing and actually nicked their personnel, like they nicked Mike Sagler, who is a famous, died recently.
I was just going to say, that was my next question, is were they subsumed into the SAS, or did
They were uncomfortable bedfellows, because what happened was the SS were out there busting stuff up, and the LRDG was sneaking around, and the two came to blows, not literally, but the thing fell apart. The thing fell apart eventually because you had one lot smashing airfields up and doing stuff like that. And also the SS couldn't look after themselves. They'd send signals back saying we've run out of fuel or we've run out of tyres. There was one operation where Paddy Mayne had to go back through the Qatar depression, which is not an easy operation itself, to forget 3 trucks because the SS literally had run out of stuff. And Bagnall was doing his head in, and actually it was Prendergast, the second guy, the second CEO of the LRDG, who was doing his head in. He was getting furious. I cannot support this. His entire LRDG was being devoted to supporting, Dave Sterling, Jock Lewis, Paddy Mayne. Actually, Jock Lewis has been killed, and William Fraser out in the desert, not doing the job he thought they should have been doing.
So we had a chat last week. Well, not even a chat. We had a text chat on WhatsApp, and you were mentioning the fact that there is a move, because you say what we talked about before was that Paddy Mayne has been made to look overly dramatized and made him to look like a bit of a lunatic, basically, and somebody who's unhinged and violent and hard drinking, and they even looked like it was. I don't know enough about the story to comment, but it was in the BBC production that there was a thing between him and another guy that there was hinting towards a homosexual relationship. Is there any kind of truth to any of that sort of thing?
I mean, I'll say this: there's now the SS Rogue Heroes version of Paddy Mayne, which is this hard drinking guy, lunatic guy, and then there's the Saint Paddy can do no wrong guy, which is, let's face it, a lot of historians support and whatever. And then there's the middle ground, which is, I mean, you and I probably know this officer. He is a nightmare off operations. He's a nightmare in camp. He drinks and he can't stop drinking. Everything he does, he busts up. So you give him a promotion, he goes and punches someone and gets demoted. I mean, how many soldiers have you got like that? Like, oh yeah, I'll put you forward for promotion. Oh no, you're back in the guard room. I mean, this is literally Paddy Mayne's career. And yet, operationally on the battlefield, they're absolute geniuses. I mean, you and I know that man. You're in a Scottish regiment. Do you know that man?
Oh, I know a lot of them.
But there you go. But this
the mess hand grenades, we call them. The mess hand grenade. The officer's mess hand grenade. You just throw them in a room, pull the pin.
I mean,
see what happens.
He gets into the SAS because he physically beats up his second in command and is returned to unit. That's how he ends up in the SAS. He isn't actually in jail, he's in the camp. So I think the trouble with it's a pity because you seem to get the extreme rather than a more balanced biography, which would be, let's look at it in the round, the things he did off duty, which were disastrous, and the things he did on the battlefield, which were amazing, and try and make a balanced and realistic assessment of his character. But you haven't got that. And I think for the purposes of dramatization on TV, they've extrapolated the more extreme stuff and played down the very, very able officer and soldier that he was, because maybe to a civilian audience, that doesn't make any sense. How can someone be really, really, really good on the battlefield, really organized and great leader, but at the same time, a complete maverick off duty? That I guess to a civilian officer, civilian audience doesn't make any sense, but we could recognize that.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So what did he, because you're mentioning about, there's this movement for him to get a posthumous Victoria Cross, I think you said. So what was it what's the citation for? What did he do?
This was so this is the 1945 citation. So, I mean, it's difficult. I don't know, because I think that if you look at that citation, then obviously he's incredibly brave. And had that citation, this is my take on it. I mean, I don't actually agree with a lot of historians on this, which is that they all think he should get a VC. But I'm looking at the citation thinking, if it was 1940-41, he would have got a VC. He would have done. But by 1944-45, 60% of VCs are posthumous. You've got guys in Japan and all over Germany and previously in France throwing themselves at the enemy in the most desperate situations. And Mayne does a really great thing, but it's not the same as, like, there's a contemporary, just to give you an example, there's a contemporary citation, actually, it's a Fijian guy who was fighting the Japanese. They were attacking a Japanese machine gun emplacement. A load of his men got gunned down because the Japanese ambushed them. And then he went forward repeatedly to drag his comrades back. Then he got wounded in no man's land. Then he shouted back to his men, leave me, but they wouldn't leave him. He realized that they were going to come forward and rescue him. So he stood up deliberately and was machine gunned by the Japanese. He got a VC. Right. So you've got, that is your level. That's the bar in 1945. I mean, the reason he didn't get a VC is because the bar was really high.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, if it was Bosnia, he'd got a VC. If it was, any modern campaign we know about, he'd got a VC. It just happened that was the year that he... And now the argument maybe, there's another way maybe you could do it, like you say, get a VC for cumulative, which is... I've had this debate. In the army, I don't think it's so common because I was an adjutant and I had to read the rules about this stuff. And it is singular. You're supposed to put someone forward for one action, not like an MC, but actually someone pointed out to me recently that, you've got Leonard Cheshire in the RAF who got a VC for loads of between 1940 and 1944, that he was in the RAF, wasn't he? So maybe those are different rules. I don't know. I think it's a can of worms. I think he's a very recognised hero. I don't know. And then my final point on this, if you start digging this up, I could name you probably 20 guys off the top of my head that would get VCs. If you start this run, where do you end? There's some in the Falklands that probably would get a VC. So what are you going to do about that?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's my. And nobody agrees. Lots of historians think, oh no, get a VC. Yeah, so I don't know.
But it's
a debate. What do you think?
I don't know. I agree with you when you talk about just incredible acts of selflessness. I don't know if it's even heroism. It's just selflessness, and you get given a medal for it. Now, how many do we not know about because they all got wiped out?
Yeah.
And how far back does it go? Or maybe the guys just what they did was maybe questionable under international, the Geneva Convention or whatever, and they told a story.
I think I'm not against. I think like a lot of people, maybe I'm against the retrospective award. The only one I think from the SAS that I think there is a case for is actually this Fijian who died in 1972 called Laba Laba. So he's a sergeant with B Squadron in the SAS who was killed in Oman, manning this 25-pounder gun. This is way off tangent, but basically there was a guy who saved the rest of his team, 8th Troop B Squadron, in a battle where they were attacked by the communist insurgents. And the reason he didn't get a VC is because it was secret. So it's like you think if you're going to start with retrospectives, start with the ones where there was a reason why he didn't get the award other than the board considering it. Because the board did consider Maynes. He went up for VC. He got the salutation. He got the nomination from Monty. It went all the way up. He was considered. So he didn't get it in the round of that board, So whereas Laba Laba never got off first base, his CO didn't recommend him. So it's like, there you go.
That's a secret.
Yeah, it's a secret. So I think there's a retrospective, and there's a few like that, where you think, if you're going to start this this thing, maybe go with the ones that are the low-hanging fruit, where you think, there's guys out here that are, probably deserving of awards who didn't get it for a really specific reason. But I'm kind of like, not that many people think like that. I think there's a few. Historian James Holland is quite well known, things like that. I think most historians think, give him the VC. A lot of people do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what does it matter in the end?
Well, there is that. I mean, maybe give him the VC, but then I think if you're going to give him a VC, you've got to open the books and go, okay, we're going to do this retrospectively, because once you do that retrospective VC is quite a big deal. You are going to have to open the books, and maybe that's a positive because they do that. I think Laba Laba's definitely next in the frame for that.
So after the North Africa campaign was coming to an end, so you mentioned that the SAS there was units being deployed in Italy. We know about North Africa, but you mentioned Italy. Did they go anywhere else in the Mediterranean region or Western Europe?
What, the SAS?
Well, after North Africa.
Yeah. So the complicated thing is there was the SBS, Special Boat Service, which was a squadron, and when they were the nascent SBS, they were doing stuff as well. But they were technically not part of the SAS, though they kind of were, because Jellicoe was in the SAS. But they had separate. They had a separate setup. For example, in Malta, the SBS operated out of Malta into southern Italy and blew up trains. And then the SAS is quite a broad church, because as I said at the beginning, it means special air service. So it's special service troops. So there were actually SAS who were not part of the SAS operating in places like Sicily, not Sicily, in Sardinia, who were just ad hoc units, but got that title because they were not part of the world of, organised troops. But essentially, for the purpose of the story, there is only the SAS in North Africa and then 2 SAS, which are created under Bill Sterling a bit later on.
But what about the SOE, the Special Operation Executive, is it? I can't remember.
Yeah, Special Operation Executive, yeah.
Any of those guys go to the SAS?
Did they go to the SAS? That would be a question. Off the top of my head. They operated in North Africa. They had a very bad time in North Africa because the SOE office in Cairo, which was nicknamed the secret office because everyone knew where it was. In fact, cab drivers used to go, "Do you want me to take you to the secret office?" The only person who doesn't appear to know about the secret office is Mining around Paddy. When they recruited her as secretary to the secret office, it was called the Office of Economic Development. She didn't know she was working for a spy organisation until he got in there. When she got in there, she realised it was completely corrupt and a security hazard. So she started spying on the SOE for Middle East headquarters. What a mess. But no, I don't know. Someone somewhere will post on this podcast and tell me of an SOE operator in Cairo that was brought in. But they didn't have a very good rep, weirdly, unlike the SOE in Britain, which was an extraordinarily good organisation under a guy called Gubbins. In North Africa, they didn't have a very good reputation. In fact, the LRDG used to get very annoyed with the SOE operators, spies who perhaps might have even been working for the other side. They were expected to ferry them to the desert and they'd run off and stuff like that. So, yeah, they weren't popular. I don't know the answer to the trick question.
All right. So what's up? What's next? For your next book? Are you going to do another book about?
I've got
something?
a couple of books. I've got a couple of books in with my agent. I won't say I've got a published either yet, and they're at the pitch stage. So I don't know what will happen with the books. I think the books are books, and also we've just shown, there's a hell of a lot of research in these books. Do you know what I mean? I've done a lot of research for 2 pitches, which would then probably take me a year or 2 years to get together. So we'll see. If they get bought, I'll do them. But needs must, and I need to keep paying the bills through film and television and stuff. So that's what I'm doing.
So you can't give any hints as to what these next 2 pitches would be?
I'm hoping maybe, I always say this, the trouble with film is it's such a long game. So I always hint at stuff that might come out. I'll know later this year. There's a couple of things I'm quite optimistic with. One of which is quite on this subject, actually. So yeah, there's some people interested and we'll see what happens. And yeah, I was saying to someone, because someone was saying about SS Rogue Heroes. I mean, getting anything off the ground is really hard. So SS Rogue Heroes, the TV series, hats off to them for getting it done. I think, and had it not been for Stephen Knight, I don't think it would have got done. So the choice is not SAS Band of Brothers or SAS Peaky Blinders. It's SS Peaky Blinders or nothing. So, the fact you've got Stephen Knight behind it was how it got made. And that's what audiences seem to engage with. Yeah. I think there's another more realistic version of stuff that seems to be another path. You either get the Peaky Blinders Guy Ritchie stuff, or you get the heightened reality, like you Black Hawk Down. There's a film coming out called Warfare, which is directed by a Navy SEAL, which could be quite interesting. I think I'm quite optimistic. It's going to be quite gruesome. I think it's about
Warfare.
Iraq. What?
Called Warfare.
Warfare. Yes, it's Alex Garland and his
Okay.
military advisor, who was a Navy SEAL. Should be out UK. I think it's penciled for something like April this year.
Nice.
But it's a interesting story. It's a very Black Hawk Downy kind of gritty reality. But it seems that audiences go one way or the other, don't they? You either watch your gritty reality or you want rock music or whatever and a great big fantasy story.
Yeah. Big bombs going off. Well, Tom, what do you reckon? Did we stay on topic almost all the time?
Do you know what? I wait for the audience. I think we diverted into a few rabbit holes, but hey, whatever. We can do another one day.
Drugs. You've got to go down the drug route. That's
what
a
you
fun
do?
story.
Me and you and drugs, or just the
We'll get some Pervitin for the next one.
Mr. Kindness may be on drugs, but I'm completely clean over here. This is water.
Well, we could maybe do some meth before the next podcast.
That would make us talk fast.
Do a 6-hour marathon.
We'd get through it quicker if we were talking faster, wouldn't we? I talk pretty quickly anyway. Yeah,
that's true.
Good.
Well, Tom, thanks again. I know you got a call now. Appreciate it, but doors always open. I love these chats. It's great to talk to you.
It's been really good. I think we actually did do some history there.
Yes. Yeah, and there's a lot more. We could do quite a few of these, but that's class. So I appreciate you, pal. And thanks for listening. And till next time.
Take care.
All right, bud. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, mate. Cheers. Bye.